It began in the hushed solitude of Lionel Hastings' countryside study, deep in Berkshire, where the scent of old leather-bound books mixed with aged Scotch. Rain pattered against the stained glass window as Lionel lowered himself into his worn armchair, the quiet of the room a stark contrast to the storm brewing within his mind. Once a trusted equerry to Queen Elizabeth II, Lionel now served in a discreet capacity as liaison between King Charles III and estranged members of the royal family. His role was undefined, uncredited, but crucial. Earlier that morning, a red-sealed envelope had arrived. No flourish, just wait. Inside, a single directive, handwritten in Charles' unmistakable scrawl: initiate informal contact, bridge the breach. Start with the younger one. Lionel knew precisely who the younger one was. Prince Henry, or rather Harry, a boy he had once watched gallop on pony trails through Windsor's fields, now exiled in California with a new life, a new voice, and most of all, a new force beside him. He rose from the chair and walked slowly to his writing desk. The antique mahogany creaked beneath the pressure of his elbow as he leaned over the address book, thumbing carefully through numbers he had not dialed in years. He found the one listed under Windsor, West Coast. He paused, exhaled, and made the call. The voice that answered was not Harry's. It was a polished American assistant, trained in careful obstruction. Lionel left a message, cloaked in warmth and vague intention. He requested a conversation, nothing more. Over the following days, he coordinated with Harold Windsor, a distant cousin and quiet royal strategist, respected for his ability to navigate internal drama with surgical silence. Together they crafted a plan, a quiet, off-the-record brunch. Just Charles and Harry. No aides, no photographers, no protocol. It would take place in Wiltshire, at a secluded estate Charles often used for painting. The idea was simple: reconnect father and son without the looming weight of the institution. Lionel believed this could be the moment. Not a grand reconciliation, but the first unspoken gesture toward healing. As the arrangements were set in motion, Lionel felt a flicker of hope. But then, 2 days later, he received a message, subtle, indirect, but undeniable. The brunch would not happen. There had been intervention. Meghan had caught wind of the meeting and cast immediate disapproval. Not in public, not in press, but in the one place it mattered most: Harry's mind. And with that, Lionel's flicker dimmed. Prince Harry stood, barefoot in the morning chill, the stone tiles of the Montecito veranda cool beneath his feet as the sun broke gently over the California hills. In one hand, he held a warm mug of chamomile tea, in the other, a worn tennis ball, Otto's favorite. The black Labrador sat patiently beside him, tail thumping in rhythm, waiting for the throw. But Harry didn't move. His eyes were fixed. Far off, beyond the hedges, beyond the hummingbird-dotted garden, towards something only he could see. He had received the message 3 days prior. The contents were plain, the tone gentle. His father had agreed to meet. It would be discreet, unstructured, no press, just the two of them and a quiet table at the Wiltshire retreat. No schedule, no speeches, just a father and son attempting something resembling peace. Harry had read the message twice, then a third time. Then he had left it open on his desk, the glow of his laptop screen dimming after hours of inactivity. He had not told Meghan. Not immediately. That evening, as they sat over dinner, a mix of roasted vegetables and grilled sea bass prepared by the house chef, he casually mentioned the suggestion. He phrased it cautiously, stripping it of implication. A simple meal, he had said, just a possibility. Maybe it was time to talk. Meghan had placed her fork down slowly and looked across the table, the flickering candlelight catching the sharp lines of her expression. She had not raised her voice, nor had she shown anger, But her response had been firm in its delivery and unmistakable in its meaning. If they wanted peace, they would include her. Not as an accessory, not as a condition, as a partner. Anything. Less, and the gesture was hollow. Harry had nodded, offered no rebuttal. But later that night, long after she had gone upstairs, he had stepped into his private study and stared again at the message. There was something gnawing inside him, an ache that pulsed quietly in the corners of his memory. He remembered childhood mornings at Balmoral, the earthy scent of horses, the warmth of his father's laugh when it wasn't burdened by crowns and duty. He remembered playing with William in the gardens, building forts out of hedge clippings, and dreaming of worlds untouched by press or protocol. He remembered being a boy who trusted the weight of legacy because he believed in the people who carried it. Now he found himself caught between two thrones, one forged in centuries of tradition, the other carved from reinvention and resistance. And he didn't know which he belonged to anymore. The next morning, he typed a response to Lionel. It was short, unfinished. He deleted it. Then he tried again. This time he left the cursor blinking for 10 minutes before shutting the laptop altogether. That afternoon, he told his assistant to cancel the tentative plan. Later, while Otto chased squirrels through the garden, Harry sat alone beneath the oak tree and tossed the tennis ball into the grass. He didn't bother calling it back. Harold Windsor sat in the dim glow of a single brass desk lamp buried deep beneath Clarence's house in a room few knew existed. The walls, once wine racks, now bore maps of royal estates and black and white photographs of generations past, ghosts of duty and lineage staring silently from behind dusty glass. His fingers moved methodically over a stack of correspondence, red-ribboned and time-stamped, but his mind was fixed elsewhere. He knew the first attempt had failed. Lionel had done his part. Harry had hesitated. Meghan had intervened. And so now it fell to Harold, the last quiet architect of private reconciliation. He reviewed the new plan with the precision of a chess player setting up his next move. There would be no direct invites, no scheduled meetings. Instead, he arranged what appeared to be coincidence. Prince William would be in New York the following week for the Global Climate Trust Summit. Harry, as Harold already knew, was scheduled to appear on a panel at a digital media conference only blocks away. It wasn't difficult to plant the seed. A single message, carefully routed through an intermediary, a trusted figure from Harry's past. One who would speak with just enough familiarity to seem harmless was all it took. Harry received the note late, one night as he reviewed edits on a new documentary series. It mentioned William's visit, the overlapping schedules, the convenient proximity. The wording was casual, but Harry understood what lay beneath it. He paused, then slowly leaned back in his chair, fingertips pressed together under his chin. By the following day, he had made contact. He didn't mention the location or suggest a venue. He simply floated the idea, informal and soft, like testing the temperature of unfamiliar water. Maybe they could grab lunch. Nothing serious. Just two brothers, away from it all. Harold, upon hearing the message had gone through, allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. This was progress, not a victory, but movement. That evening, he closed the door to the war room for the first time in weeks, permitting himself the indulgence of a rare, single malt and a few minutes of silence under the oil portrait of King George VI. But the quiet did not last. 2 days before William's arrival in New York, Meghan's team intercepted a change in the Sussex itinerary. Her assistant delivered the news promptly. Harry had expressed interest in staying an extra day. The reason was unclear. Meghan took the information, absorbed it without visible reaction, and placed a call to Harry herself. She was already en route to Los Angeles for a gala, but her tone was steady. She reminded him of past ambushes, of broken trust, of subtle manipulations disguised as invitations. She asked no direct questions, but made clear that if he planned to meet William without her presence, she would not return to Montecito until further notice. When the call ended, Harry remained motionless in his chair, the city lights of the Pacific Coast painting patterns across the walls. He reached for his phone again, hovered over the message thread with Harold, and typed 3 words, "Let's not push." Back in Clarence House, Harold received the update with cold detachment. The gambit had failed. Again, the board remained unchanged. Crossed the note out with a heavy line and lit a cigarette, a habit he had given up decades ago, but kept for nights like this. The prince had chosen silence once more. And this time, it wasn't hesitation. It was surrender. Lionel Hastings stood before the frost-glazed window of his London flat, watching as the winter mist drifted like forgotten breath across the Thames. His overcoat hung untouched by the door. He had dressed, prepared, and waited, but no call came. No updates, no change, no resolution. The silence had stretched for days, then weeks, until it became something heavier, something permanent. He had followed the second attempt closely. Harold had informed him of the New York arrangement, a silent maneuver with all the elegance of old diplomacy. And for a moment, Lionel had believed in it. He had paced his study, clutched his watch, replayed the hopeful scenario in his mind. Harry and William meeting at a quiet cafe, coffee steaming between them, fences lowered just enough to glimpse the past, but none of it had come to pass. When the news finally trickled back to him, it came with a familiar sting. Meghan had caught wind of the encounter, and Harry had retreated once more into the murky space between duty and defiance. Lionel hadn't expressed surprise. He had simply sat down at his desk and begun to write. The letter was not long, but it carried weight. He addressed it directly to King Charles, using the careful language only courtiers of a certain age still employed. He spoke of the effort made, the resistance met, and the wall that stood unmoved despite every civil attempt to scale it. He did not cast blame nor offer strategic advice. He only recorded the truth as he saw it, that the breach was no longer a diplomatic wound, but a generational fracture. In closing, he submitted his quiet resignation. The palace accepted it with graceful brevity. A short response arrived 2 days later, typed and sealed. There would be no public acknowledgement, no formal farewell. His departure would be explained as fatigue, perhaps a gentle nod to age or shifting responsibilities. On his final day, Lionel visited Clarence House once more. He stepped into the corridor where portraits of monarchs lined the walls, their painted eyes fixed in perpetual judgment. He passed by aides, staff, and old colleagues who nodded solemnly but said little. In the great vestibule he paused, turned back briefly, then exited through the stone arch, the sound of his footsteps swallowed by the wind. Elsewhere, far from the corridors of tradition, Harry reviewed production cuts in his Montecito studio. Meghan stood in the next room rehearsing lines for an upcoming interview. The atmosphere was light, structured, purposeful, almost clinical in its calm. There were no mentions of Wiltshire, no quiet brunches, no memories of Balmoral fires or childhood fortresses. Otto, the black Labrador, lay curled at Harry's feet, tail twitching in sleep. Harry reached down absently, stroked the dog's head, then returned to the screen. The cursor blinked in the editing software like a heartbeat steady. Indifferent, forward. In a drawer nearby sat the watch Lionel had once gifted him as a boy, engraved with the Royal Horse Guards emblem. Harry had not worn it in years. Still, he had never thrown it away. Back in London, Lionel packed his final box. Among the items was a letter never sent, addressed to Harry, folded neatly beside an old photograph of the two of them at Sandringham years ago. He placed it in the drawer, locked it, and left the key with the doorman. And so, the story settled not with thunder, but with dust. A quiet man departed. A silent sun remained. And between them the mirror lay broken, not shattered, but cracked just enough to forget what the reflection used to be.